The secret of the golden flower. We have begun to understand now that the reason why the book is so esoteric, that it is full of blinds and veils, hiding what might be dangerous, and also what one would say should be protected when we talk about casting pearls before swine. If we follow the line of thinking so far, we become aware that many of the symbols, especially of Greek and Roman architecture, are pointing to spiritual aspiration. We're also aware that there is a physiological and anatomical basis for spiritual growth. We are born with a sacral center. Somehow or the other, we must discipline ourselves so that the energies which are normally expended and wasted in sexual expression can be kept together, can be hoarded, like a miser hoards his gold, and that these energies can be turned from being lost in outward and downward expression into upward and inward expression. And so the climax of any effort in this respect is to bring the mental, emotional, and spiritual associations of the precious fluids, not the fluid itself, but the precious counterparts, the precious impregnating energies, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, higher Manas, mental, astral. We can draw them upwards in a supreme act of sublimation. And this is what the fluted columns suggest, that you take the energies of the gonads upwards and you concentrate them, and you concentrate them in the region of the eye. This is the pupil of the eye. The pupil of the eye, and it is from the pupil of the eye that power can be expressed. Now, if you look at the sheet we've just given you, there it is, it suggests there that when we are competent, we are able to take the energies up and create around the three head chakras that we've already described, create around these chakras circles, the three circles interpenetrating each other at right angles. There, I've got my finger on it. The three chakras interpenetrating each other at right angles to create a ball, as it were, a globe. And the globe lies inside, there it is, inside the cranium. But that's not the end of it. It gives out a gloire, and the Americans call it glory. And it's this kind of glory that they have around their third eye, which is, of course, at the top of a truncated pyramid. Sorry, I've got chalk in my throat. So all these different pictures are meant to be options for you. But then, of course, we have to understand that the eyes themselves are very powerful, as Madame Blavatsky said. And the cobra the cobra's power lies in its eyes, the ability to engage its victim with focused glance, and for the strike of the cobra with its fangs and its poison to be adequately directed by the eyes. The Egyptian priests and the pharaohs themselves, of course, wore headdresses in which an asp was placed on the front of the headdress, again suggesting a creature who had taken up the slack of its tone, its muscle tone, and is ready to strike. It's like a lion who is not ready to strike until he crouches and takes up his muscle tone and is ready to spring at an instant. And the eyes then are thus symbolized as structures capable of donating, capable of piercing. Leadbeater was able to, by an act of focus, to create, as it were, a funnel of energy from his brow center, which could hold atoms steady. And of course we know today that there was a basis for this, in that the electrons of atoms vibrate, and if you put them in a magnetic field they oscillate, and is the basis of the MRI, of the MRI scan. But in the 1930s, a Dr. Oscar Brunner began to tour America, demonstrating a machine that he had got, which had a rule, and he was able to assess the intensity of the output of the human eyes, the intensity of artists' eyes. And as they create their work of art, a sculptor working on a sculpture, a painter working on his portrait, whatever the creative act, Brunner was able to measure the content of the art, the objet d'art, the object that had been painted. And he could tell from his measurements what degrees biometric, he called them, had been impregnated into the work of art. Something coming from the artist who painted, or the poet who wrote, the Shakespeare who wrote, and so on, was embedded in the work of art. And that has all sorts of implications from the point of view of quantum physics, from things like non-locality, which is meaningless to you unless you've done a bit of quantum physics, all the way through to giving a thing an aura. What we're saying today is this, that if you have the Mona Lisa up on a wall in an art gallery, those who stare at it, art critics looking at it, stare at it, are pouring into that picture their own energies from their eyes, not the artist. The artist has done that. Picture is impregnated by the artist who created it. And any act of creation, and this is the link with sexuality, any act of creation imbues a thing with its content. And so an art critic looking at the Mona Lisa is pouring something in to the texture of that work of art. And now comes the important part. The important part is that the work of art is changing the observer. And that's scientific fact today. It's accepted by the quantum physicists. That the observer changes what he's looking at, and what is being looked at, the object looked at, changes the observer. Consider the implications of this. That perhaps man's role on the earth may be that of an observer. And that everything that we see or study or look at under a microscope or through a magnifying glass or through the lenses of our own eyes is being changed by us. And if we are good, goodness will enter the structures we see, we observe. And there's a lot of implication here with regard to how much do you observe? Do you just see something? Or do you look at it? Do you just look at it? Or do you study it? Do you just study it? Or do you concentrate on it? Which is the second step of meditation. And in meditation, what are we doing to the object for meditation that we create in the space here? You know what the American object is. In the crest of America, you have got the truncated pyramid, and you have an eye, the eye of God, they say, like to say, the eye of God with glory around it. And the suggestion there is visualize a truncated pyramid, a half-finished pyramid there between the eyebrows, and present it to the higher self. Feed the higher self with your visualized object and see what the higher self responds with. And so some of us have worked out a technique, a method, whereby you can take an aspect from a horoscope, planetary aspect, easily. Anyone got a chart? We take it out. Present it in your spiritual diary, visualize it if you can, and the higher self will respond to it. The higher self will respond to it. And always remember that you have the ability in you not only to study something or concentrate, that's the symbol of concentration, that you have the ability to concentrate on something. We all do that when we read. Our attention goes to the tiniest glyph of print. But can you take that observing faculty that you have got and turn it inwards and observe things inwardly, because you can change what lies within you? Because that is the most recent discovery, is that the observer changes what he observes. And if it's an inner structure and you are observing it, it can change you. And so the inner structure, we call it in an object for meditation, the inner structure can be manipulated by the consciousness of the higher self, or the Christ, if it suits your religion. And the Christ is the sum total of the inner selves. Christ is or the Buddha is the sum total, if it's in a Manakaya or a Bodhisattva, the sum total of the inner selves. And you can identify yourself in this way. You can say, I'm Douglas Baker. I'm a peripatetic teacher. wandering around the globe, giving out ancient wisdom, the language of the day. That's I am. But I can also say to myself, I am not just Douglas Baker. I am part of a greater being, and that greater being may have a cosmic consciousness. And when I am in yoga, and I have practiced pratyahara, which is the subverting of the senses, quietening of the senses so that they don't disturb, I can be part of his consciousness. And he can express himself through me. Or I might even be able to reach him with my adoration, or reach him with what we call prayer, but best of all, reach him with meditation. Dr. Oscar Brunner measured humanity, various examples of humanity, and he measured the intensity of the output of the eyes as being 350 degrees, 350 degrees for average person. He found that when he measured the creative energy of Joshua Reynolds' pictures, he was 586, and Giotto 654. Remember, 350 is average. Giotto 654, Chopin 550, Wagner 538, Dickens, Charles Dickens 540, Napoleon 598, Nelson 510, Frederick the Great 657, Sir Francis Bacon, an English master at the time, 640, Michelangelo 689, and Leonardo da Vinci 725. All mumbo-jumbo until recently, when a lot of the quantum physics, and nobody in quantum physics can be absolutely certain of what's going on. Impossible things are occurring, which made Einstein say God does not play dice with the cosmos. But there are some very strange things, and they relate to particles that are 1/1,000,000th the size of the nucleus of an atom, and particles that are 1,000,000,000,000 times the size of an atom. He's talking about emotional matter and energy, and mental matter and energy. But do you think the Theosophical Society will pick that plum and announce it and say, listen, this is what we have been teaching for thousands of years, that man can assemble mental energies and can create thought forms? And that's what quantum physicists are all about. I share something with the guy who wrote The Center of the Cyclone.
Lilly.
John Lilly. John Lilly said that when he was younger, he could detect around his head, surrounding his head, he could detect flows of tiny sparks that could move, and he could affect them with his mind. And I have had the same experience, which I began to record when I was 4 years of age, more then than now, that there were flows of myriads and myriads of the tiniest little golden particles, and that you could push them in one direction by an act of will. or draw them towards you and concentrate them. This is a likeness to what is described in the book of The Secret of the Golden Flower. It likens spiritual growth to ripe fruit, to ripe black grapes, and to plums and fruit like that, that begin to have a down on them, a powder on them. Maybe it's yeast cells, we don't know. But one thing is indicating that a fruit is ripening and ready to eat is that it has a powder-like material on its skin, on the outside. And the Book of the Golden Flower talks about this down, the spiritual down that is exuded not only by ripe fruit, but is exuded by ripe humans, humans who have reached maturity. And straight away my mind goes to season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. Lovely poetry. Try and see everything in terms of poetry and symbols and images. Wonderful. And try and get yourself to practice visualization. Visualization opens this, the inverted lotus on the top of the head, the inverted lotus. And learn to record your dreams and your visual experiences. Do it painstakingly, lovingly. We've got friends here in the audience that do it. The spiritual diary, we call it, in which you record these sacred observations of yours. And learn to retain a degree of consciousness when you sleep. Don't say you can't do it. I've just done a series of seminars on out-of-body experience for Gloucester Place. And we can remain faintly conscious. How many of you fall out of bed every night? Well, that's ridiculous, of course you don't. Why not? If you fall asleep, why don't you roll right out of bed? You have to roll because it's part of physiology. You've got to move the body because the blood in the veins has to be squeezed so that it will move in one direction towards the heart. And that's why we turn over in bed. But we don't fall out of bed because we're faintly awake. If you can increase that and become more alert while you sleep, you'll have a very, very vivid inner life. And one of the things that will happen to you is you begin to pick up information from the higher self. And the higher self will tell you which chakra to open. Is it the 4-petal static chakra at the base of the spine that'll be there forever? Is it the 6-petaled lotus of the sacral center? And you may have experiences of snakes, which are the symbol of the sexual factor. Or it may be the 8-petaled lotus of the solar plexus. Unlikely to be any of those, unless it's warning. What you are likely to experience are images of the higher centers that you must aim for. The space between the brows and the Ajna chakra, which is a 2-petaled lotus in white and silver, or the 1,000-petaled lotus, and I gave you a description this morning of one, or the 16-petaled lotus of the throat chakra. Throat chakra is very important. It turns you into a different kind of being. It's as if you're changing from subhuman to human or from human to superhuman, because it affects the throat chakra. And the throat chakra has the ability to change you in extraordinary ways. Let me tell you this story. I'm sure some of you have heard it already. When the Great Exhibition in Paris in 1870, I think, no, that was the year of the Prussian War. In Paris, they brought over some lizards, newts, from the lakes in Peru, and they put them into their ponds in the exhibition in Paris. And these water nymphs suddenly began to turn into land animals. They began to grow claws where their fingers had been webbed. They began to take on bright colors on their skin. They began to grow eyelids. They began to extend their tails into a structure that could act as defense. They were changing from a water creature into a land animal. Amazement amongst the scientists. And then they found that it was the water in Paris had got iodine in it, whereas the water in Peru had not got sufficient iodine in it and kept them water-based. Now they became land animals and changed them. And iodine is the material of the thyroid gland and the throat chakra. And that gives you a hint immediately as to the kind of scope that the throat chakra has got. Immense scope to change you. You must remember these things. And then the next thing you do with the chakras is to see if they are beginning to move, to rotate. They may rotate clockwise, moving towards the right, or anti-clockwise, moving towards the left, or vice versa. I forget now, depending on where you're looking at them from. Or they rotate on themselves like a cartwheel in a film. And these indicate the degree of development of the chakra concerned. And if it's repeated again and again and again, you know that's for you. You must do something. Look it up, find out what it is that is needed to stimulate the chakra. Or if it's a chakra whirling and beginning to smoke and go, it's overstimulated. You're being overstimulated by something, and then you must change your way of life. Best thing that I can say if you're overstimulated is go out and do your marketing each day. Don't buy too much food at once, just buy enough to last you a day, and mix with the common man in the marketplace. This is very good for destimulating you if you're overstimulated and you can't sleep, and so on, and so on, and so on.